All right, let's go ahead and kick this thing off. First of all, thanks everybody for being here today, and thanks for being members. We appreciate it. Helps us bring the content you're asking for. And I wanted to let you know, again, remind you that we have got our member call coming up, and that is going to be with Mr. David Baker. So that's going to be fun. And as a reminder, that is on Friday at 2 o'clock Eastern. So don't miss the member call. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Tom O'Neill, formerly of The Nerdery, and also David Annis, who is his co-founder at Parallax. And they are here today to talk to us about operationalizing your business for growth. And with that, I will hand it over. Take it away, Tom.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be hanging out with you guys. I'm a big fan of the Bureau, and I guess Dave and I are honored to call ourselves your friends. We're going to talk, like Carl said, about operationalizing growth in agencies or digital consultancies. And to us, it's all about focus. Focus is super important. And we love Rick and Morty. So if you don't get anything out of today's webinar, hopefully you'll go home with a new appreciation of our favorite cartoon. But, oh, hold on. I'll let Dave introduce himself and talk about like what he's been focused on for the first decade of his career, and then I'll follow on what Carl said about me.
Yeah. So, hey everyone, nice to I guess virtually meet you. Thanks for taking the time to listen to us jabber on. But yeah, I'm David Annis. I'm formerly the partner and managing director of an agency here in Minneapolis called Zeus Jones. It's about 55 people that specializes in brand and business strategy, innovation, and design. All kinds of sweet cliche words, but working with some pretty large organizations in kind of the innovation space and brand. And prior to that, I worked at a larger advertising agency here called Fallon. And I was trying to grow a business from, we made it from 5 to 55 and started to see some challenges in growing past that while maintaining a strong culture. And I tried to solve that problem internally. And when Tom came to talk to me about an opportunity to really focus on solving that issue for agencies, I jumped on board. So here I am.
Well, thanks, Dave. Yeah, and one thing Dave didn't point out is that his real strength in our partnership, and then also in his past at Zeus Jones and Fallon, is he's kind of an operational expert that like knows how to take these really creative, brilliant people who don't really love process and operations and help them, think that there's no process to it, but operate in a way that's consistent. And so having him join me in this next endeavor was really important for that reason, that he's found a way to help these creative people, find the value of those operations without feeling like they're stuck in a cage. My background, as Carl pointed out, I spent the last 14 years helping build a company called Nerdery. Our focus was on growth. I think we did a pretty darn good job of operationalizing growth. I started as a third employee. I was a programmer when I started there, but and they were called Sierra Bravo at the time. I convinced them to partner with agencies like Fallon to be their digital arm. Not short after that, we rebranded to Nerdery, and we grew from the handful of people when I started to about 500 when I left a couple of years ago, my post as CEO. And that growth came from, a lot of effort in making sure that we could deliver, to sell, and, do all the things related to that consistently. And so I got to figure out how to advance the deck. There we go. And so I think getting started here, it's a little bit of our background, where our focus was, Dave was focused on building a world-class agency. He had a lot of luck in that. I was focused on building a consultancy. I think we did pretty well on that. I'm curious, for those of you guys attending today, when you think about your business and your focus, especially when it comes to evolving or improving the business, where's your focus? What are your top priorities? Does anyone want to contribute on the chat or unmute themselves and shout it out? Anyone? Nobody?
No.
All right. Well, I will just say that I'm assuming all of you folks are very smart. I think that it's the folks that I've interacted with at the Bureau have all been very engaged in their businesses, lots of owners and operators. I'm assuming that's who we've got on the call here. You and your employees, your team members, those smart people, your time is precious, and where you focus your attention matters. I think that often in this industry, when we're running an agency or a consultancy or a digital shop, it often feels like a World War II like triage tent. We're just dealing with whatever problems come up every single day. Which customer or employee has the biggest issue that we can solve right now? That triage is something that we get really good at, and often in a growing agency, it feels like that triage is our primary focus. And those of us, especially in digital, we tend to kind of operationalize that reacting to what's happening in the business every day. And we get really good at adapting to the changing needs of our customers and our employees and our business. And, we get a lot of gratification over that feeling of triage, right? And I think that it's not just me that feels that way. I feel like I missed an entire slide here. Bear with me. I did. I somehow missed an entire slide. Okay. You're not alone if you feel that way. If you feel like there's been an operationalized reactive behavior inside your business, that you can respond to those changing demands in the business, your customers, your people. While I spent the last 14 years building the Nerdery, since I left, especially for the last 12 months, I've been interviewing a myriad of different agencies to further my perspective on like how this stuff works. I've listed a bunch of these folks here. Some of the names you might recognize, some of them might be new to you, but I've interviewed CEOs, COOs, founders, all kinds of different folks inside of, like I said, this myriad of different agencies and consultancies to learn about what they're doing to operationalize their business and to respond to the changing demands in their business. And there's been a lot of consistent threads that I find in interviewing all these folks. And I've put that together in a bit of a thesis that Dave and I are using to build a software product. But in the meantime, I want to share some of those theories with you guys. And so, if you feel like you're in this triage mode, again, you're not alone. Apart from just researching by interviewing, I think we're up to like 75 different organizations now. We've also found some pretty cool documentation and research that has been completed before us. One such piece of research is put together by this company called SBI, Service Performance Index. And it's a company that on an annual basis surveys thousands of different professional services organizations, consultancies, digital consultancies, agencies, all kinds of different pro services companies. And they've come up with a framework, a maturity framework that I think is pretty decent. And I want to share a little bit about that framework with you, mostly to point out where I feel like there's the best opportunities in operationalizing our businesses based on my research, interviews, and experience. So their maturity framework has 5 levels, starting with heroic. And they describe these heroic organizations as opportunistic, almost like chameleons. These are, these entrepreneurial organizations, when they first kick off, they're constantly changing and evolving based on what they see directly in front of them in the market. Usually there's small groups where everybody on the team kind of, is really good at wearing a lot of hats, and they figure out whatever they can do to win and succeed. Eventually, as those organizations grow, they become what they call piloted. They start to begin to build processes and maybe even like separate business functions between sales and delivery. The processes at level 2 tend to more heavily emphasize in production or delivery, where it's obvious. You've got project managers over there who are good at operationalizing things like people like me and Dave, who this is a natural instinct for us. And level 3 is deployed. After you've begun to build these processes in these independent silos of sales and delivery, at some point you realize you have to create some alignment across those functions and also some metrics that could potentially span those. And that's what they've called the deployed level. Next is institutionalized, where they can take that understanding of the necessity of alignment and actually consistently deliver aligned and shared goals across the organization. And finally, the kind of the biggest, the best agencies surveyed, they call it collaborative. And this is when they go beyond just operational excellence across these different silos in the business, but they actually have systematic evolution in their business and their service offering. And that's kind of what we all should be striving for. Has anyone ever heard of the SBI Performance Index? No?
Nope.
Okay.
Hey, Tom, they can't unmute, so they're replying in the chat stream for you.
Okay.
I'll let you know what they're saying.
All right. Thanks,
nope,
Dave.
No, and nope.
Okay, cool. This webinar thing's a little different because usually I can kind of see the crowd, and what how people are reacting and kind of read the room. So I'm going to have to rely on my friend Dave here to watch that chat. One of the cool things about that performance index is that they publish a benchmark, which I think is pretty neat. And on my screen here, I'm showing, my version of their benchmark that says, based on the different key performance indicators that I think are kind of interesting, I've shown here the difference between a level 2 organization and a level 3 organization with about 5 million in revenue. And so the bottom line is the EBITDA of a level 2 is about 400K, whereas the EBITDA of a level 3 is almost twice that, or more than twice that. And, I show this slide because I think that, for one, when I was growing Nerdery, I really had no idea what other organizations like ours, how they were performing and at what level I should expect our team to be able to perform. And, the obvious thing that I did that I think a lot of us do is I advance the dang slides. I relied on a metric that I thought was the easiest to measure, and it was the most obvious to myself and the rest of the organization in this metric that we all look at called employee utilization. I'm assuming that most of us measure utilization on a regular basis here. Good assumption, Carl? Dave, we're saying yes, we got thumbs up there. When I show this slide to people, they typically zero in on that metric, this employee billable utilization one. It's a pretty easy one for us to identify with, while there's a host of other ones that I think are really important there. And there's a lot of companies out there selling on this concept that you could potentially improve your utilization as an agency and you'll make tons of money, right? And it's totally true. These companies like Maven Link and NetSuite OpenAir, all their marketing material is saying, let's focus on this, employee utilization thing that is a big pain point for you. And if we can make just a little improvement on that, we're going to have this huge return on investment, right? And so for an agency with 25 people, if you're billing at $150 an hour, that 1 point in utilization it should be worth about 72 grand for you. That stuff makes sense, everybody? I hope that people are nodding on their other end of this thing, and I hope that people
we're getting some yeps and oh yeah.
Yep, and oh yeah, and yep, all right. And I think that those old people who sell Maven Link and NetSuite OpenAir are going to make sure that that you understand that what gets measured is what gets done. And if we can help you better measure utilization, then you can improve utilization. is, typically their sales pitch. And yeah, honestly, like I chased that ghost for a long time running Nerdery. We were very proud of our very high utilization. And, but it took me a long time to realize that the just measure it and it'll improve thing is kind of baloney. As long as I've been working on this problem, the guy who coined that term has been dead. And honestly, I think that most of us who are in digital, we know that like driving behavior is more than just looking at a number. Sure, yes, visibility will drive behavior, but the question is it the right behavior? And so just because I have a report that says what my current utilization is and what my utilization for the past 3 months has been, is that the behavior that we want to drive? Because I'm sure that all of you have found yourself in this situation operating your organization where you're looking at the report for this month's or this week's utilization and you're like, oh my gosh, it's down. And you call your like team and be like, what are you going to do to raise utilization? Like, work harder now, right? Like, obviously that's not the behavior that we want to drive, right? So just measuring and looking at utilization is not what's going to drive profitable growth in your business. I believe that, sometimes just measuring certain things can lead to bad behaviors. It's a lot like the scale, right? I'm trying to cut some pounds right now, and if I wake up, get out of bed, jump on the scale every morning, that might influence my behavior. That might change like the amount of like pizza I have during the day or the amount of beers that I drink, after work at night. Like that behavior that it drives that day, there's a lot of studies that show those aren't the behaviors that are going to change my weight long term, right? So if I jump on the scale and it's, hey, my emotional reaction is it's good, I'm down a couple of pounds, again, that might change my behavior for that day, but it's not going to have a long-term impact. If you Google Tom O'Neill and CrossFit, you'll find this picture. That's a true story. And this might represent what good behavior is for me and weight loss look like. It's pretty simple, right? Calories in, calories out. If I'm measuring the behaviors of how much I consume and how much I work out every day, that is most likely going to have a much better impact on my long-term weight that when I get on the scale at the end of the month, right? So can we make it as simple as weight loss in our business? Can we stop looking at utilization and look at some other things that are going to drive better behaviors for our business? We know that there's better behaviors, right? And what we're talking about today is operationalizing growth. And those behaviors come in the funnel to flywheel and in your operational excellence for your delivery process. And so, it should be as simple, sarcastically, as just saying, hey, what's the best practice for funnel to flywheel? And let's just steal one of these design thinking, lean startup, agile methods and make sure that our team just does it all perfect, right? So just start doing it all perfect, everybody. And by the way, do it for very little money and you have to love your job at the same time, right? That's the ideal, right? It's not just as easy as like waking up tomorrow and I have the CrossFit body, or waking up tomorrow and you guys have a perfect sales funnel and a perfect method for delivering consistently. We have to start to figure out, where to start. And so just like in the weight loss industry, people have made, a ton of money and invested a lot in figuring out how to measure and what to measure in order to create that outcome that we all want, right? The weight loss or the EBITDA. Again, this benchmark here has a lot of really cool and interesting KPIs. And for many of us, if you're like me, the easiest one to measure and the easiest one to keep track of and compare yourself with is that utilization number. But, like weight loss, what are the calories in, calories out? What are the other things that we might want to think about? In my opinion, after interviewing literally near 100 different organizations, ranging from just, small boutique shops of 5-10 people all the way up to international agencies with over 3,000 employees, the consistent high performers that I've talked to, they care about these two things. They care about how frequently that the standardized delivery method is used and what their deal pipeline relative to their quarterly bookings forecast is. And so those organizations that have a very high standard delivery method used and, you know, a very high deal pipeline relative to their quarterly bookings forecast, they're the ones who consistently grow profitably. So what does that mean for you guys? Can we make it as simple as calories? I think you can, honestly. You know, you don't need to today adopt one of these, you know, design thinking, lean startup, agile methodologies. I'm sure each of you have some great delivery processes that you consistently use to do a great job for your customers. There's probably a certain set of artifacts, there's a certain set of deliverables, there's a certain set of touch points that you have with every single client that you could say is pretty standard. Is that true? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Yeah. Again, it doesn't have to be this, you know, super cliche, you know, best practice. It has to be what's working for you and what sets you apart. And so the idea is that there are certain things that when compared against your competitors, that, you know, maybe the shop that's overseas or the staff augmentation company down the street, when they say, you know, those guys are cheaper, and you say our unique method creates more value, what is that unique method and what and why is there value for your customers? And what are the things that differentiate you? That's what we're talking about with standardized delivery method. We don't mean that you want to create a bunch of libraries of code to reuse. We don't mean that you need to have, you know, the exact deliverables pre-built for everyone that you can just kind of roll off like a robot. It means, what are the parts of your process that make you consistently deliver a great experience and a great outcome for your client? And, you know, what are those unique artifacts, those unique methods, those processes, those touch points that keep your customers coming back? And if you can identify what those things are and start to tell the story of that method through thought leadership, marketing, incorporating it into your sales strategy and process, incorporate it into the way that you price, that you plan and you resource work, and then you deliver based on a duration, not based on tasks. So the idea of pricing based on, you know, story points or, you know, the hours it would take you to complete many features or tasks, you know, that goes away for most of the companies that I'm interviewing after they hit about 30, 40 people. When they get to the 40 people and up standpoint, they start to think more about what's the delivery method that we're using, what are the roles and capabilities that are required to deliver there, what's the general size and scope, and how long does that size and scope take that team to deliver. Once you start to tell your story that way, sell your method that way, that's what we mean by standardized delivery method. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions there? No, Dave?
Nope, totally makes sense.
So again, from the same benchmark that I talked about earlier, they talk about what the impact is of delivering using this standardized methodology. And for those organizations that do not use a standard method, or for under 20% of all of the projects they deliver have something standard, compared to the organizations with over 80% using a standard method, there's a stark difference in some of the key performance indicators. I think, you know, one thing interesting to note is the on-time project delivery. There's almost 10 points of improvement there. And that's pretty important, not just to talk about the customer satisfaction standpoint of that, like, you know, yes, our customers are happy when we deliver on time, but also from a annualized utilization of your resources standpoint. When you consistently deliver on time, it makes it easier for the organization to plan when things are going to start and stop. And so that 81% project delivery is not just a representation of client satisfaction, but also it's the employees that resource your projects and who plan for future projects are going to be able to make a much bigger impact having that consistency of delivery too.
Quick question that came up was, can you provide a couple of examples of a delivery method?
Sure. Yeah. Right. So I'm just going to go on the assumption that most of us are digital agencies here. We're developing some sort of software, whether it's a website or a mobile app or something like that. I think that, if you think about, let's just say a mobile app for an example, before we realized that we should sell the delivery method as opposed to the specific features and functionality of a mobile app, it really took a mindset for the entire organization to make that shift. So, prior to that, we'd go out and our clients would say, hey, Tom, we need a mobile app. We need this set of features that's going to help us better serve our customers on mobile. And so we would go and do a little bit of like almost business analysis, some requirements analysis, and we'd like interview the customer and we'd detail every single little feature that they wanted in this mobile app. And we'd spend a lot of our time making sure that we had this big long list of features, and then below that we had like an even longer list of assumptions that was like, okay, for all these features that we've detailed here, here's what we're assuming so you don't think that we're delivering something that we're not. And it was truthfully like at the end of the sales process, the proposal or the statement of work was really just a CYA document. And so, we'd sell a mobile app where there was a value that they were trying to get for their end users or their clients, right? And we talked a lot more in our proposal about what the specific features they asked for and the specific things we weren't going to deliver to make sure that we were on the same page that we got started, right? And that worked, to some extent. Although the one thing that we learned doing that for a few years was that typically that list of features and that list of assumptions was only good when the customer was mad. So for all the different clients that we had that were our best clients, they never really looked at that list of features or assumptions ever again. And I would bet you that for 100% of them, the mobile product that we delivered did not have a one-to-one match of features that were in that list. And it probably had some things that we didn't think of that were in the assumption list that we covered or we didn't cover, right? On the flip side, for every customer that, hated us or that we ended up hating, we spent a lot of time making sure that we had a one-to-one, matchup of the features that were in the proposal and then the features that were delivered. And I think what I learned from that is that when the projects are going really well, customers are really more focused on the outcome of the deliverable, like the value that it's creating for their end users. And they're less focused on, what specific features that we both thought that might create that value when we started the process and wrote that first SOW or proposal. On the flip side, the customers that didn't like us, where the projects didn't go well, where we weren't providing value to the users, we were trying to hunt and figure out why. And it always came down to, well, maybe you didn't deliver on all the features that you said you were going to at the beginning of the thing. And that's why we ended up not liking each other, is because we didn't get the features right during the process. Well, what's an example of a good method? Methods like this, design thinking, lean startup, agile methods, there's a lot of value in methods like this. And, a lot of organizations like yours, like Nerdery, like all of these companies in Silicon Valley, we've proven that there's some really great methods for like identifying the need, the customer problem, through research, through definition, through ideation or through, prototype or whatever, iterating on that and eventually like delivering something of value that we can test, right? So some sort of iterative method where we're incorporating user experience design and user feedback and that sort of thing. Like we've all built something like this inside of our businesses, I'm hoping, where you're building processes that would counteract some of the common pain points of delivering software. So, we've all tried to move away from the waterfall method for a reason, right? And so what are those reasons, and why does that help our customers avoid the common pain points of delivering software, right? And the idea with standardized delivery method is that you can start to sell on that method and that process that you've developed to avoid those common pain points, and less about what I call speeds and feeds. We're faster, we're cheaper, we're going to do all your features that you've listed here in this waterfall method, and we promise they're all going to be perfect, right? If you're going to differentiate yourselves from those staff aug shops, from the overseas development, you should be selling on the idea that your method helps make sure that the outcome is what the user needs, not the outcome is, and that is more important than the specific features that you know about when you've wrote the proposal.
And I would just chime in and say that the way I always thought about it in my agency was the sort of speeds and fees approach that leads you down a commodity road, right? Mm-hmm. You end up basically competing against people for the lowest price. It becomes a commodity game, and you have a hard time establishing yourself as somebody that has a larger point of view. If you're selling approach, strategy, and outcomes versus prices and features, you have a much better chance of evolving in any sort of direction that makes sense for you.
So the idea is to come up with your method, map it similar to like something like this, and start to sell on those different value proposition points in your method, less about like what the specific features or functionality that you plan to deliver in the project are. The second thing that I think is really important is operationalizing this solution-based sales process. So, again, if we try to move ourselves to the mindset away from, we're just delivering on a feature list and this waterfall like approach to building exactly what they said that they wanted, we have to also, build that into the way that we get new business. I think a lot of operators and owners and founders of agencies that I've talked to, they get into the business by starting their own business or whatever. They start their own business because they're really good. They're really good at their craft, and their first, maybe 2-3 years of growth comes from word of mouth. It comes from, relationships. It comes from doing a great job with one customer and getting follow-on business from that customer. And also like those customers telling other customers like, hey, this boutique is really kick-ass and you should call them, right? And so that sales process is really organic for a lot of us when we get started. And, we tend to have this utilization that feels like a roller coaster because, we get a bunch of new work and we get really busy. We work really hard on that, make sure we do a great job. And we're really, really focused on, winning that work or executing that work. And all of a sudden we realize we're starting to run out of work. So then we go try to drum up some new business, and then we found some more business, and now we're going to get busy again, right? And so the roller coaster comes because while we've been doing a good job maybe operationalizing the way that we deliver, we kind of forgot to operationalize the way that we're going out and earning new business. And I've got a few friends who run boutique shops, and when we first started hanging out, they'd always say, yeah, I'm never going to grow because, I really want to be focused on very specific customers and very, very specific, really meaningful, great work. And, they kind of wear that as a badge of honor, and they get really excited about for my employees, we're going to never have those crappy projects that stink, and we're only going to work on projects that are cool. And that's usually like very well intentioned and very true to the belief and of the folks who founded these businesses. But again, within those cycles, how often they hold themselves accountable to that vision, I think it depends on how much work they have, right? And so because they haven't built an operationalized solution-based sales method, they tend to, when they're real busy, be very selective. But if the work kind of dries up by accident, then they'll be a little less selective, right? And so if you get a few drinks in any of these guys, they'll admit that, And what I found in the folks who've been able to be very selective, or the folks who've been able to grow, is they, just like with their delivery method, they create an operation around how they sell and market. And so if you really want to be consistent in what you sell and what you deliver, you've got to be as focused on going out and finding those opportunities as you are in delivering, quality work in your craft. And, and that is, it's not very difficult if you create that focus. Again, where you focus, where you spend your time matters. Again, the same benchmark talks about sales effectiveness, and they've kind of scored different organizations as very ineffective versus very effective. And here's some related KPIs to that score. The organizations that are very effective, again, they're selling on ROI, on value, and on outcome. They're not selling on features. They're not selling on specific, proposals that have every single, detail of what they're going to deliver. They're focused on the value that their product or service will bring to the customer. They're focused on the outcome that that product will bring for their customers, right? And with that, it makes it a little bit easier to deliver on a consistent sales process. And having, a similar way that we document what the value will be, discover what that value will be, the way that we present our method and propose our solutions. They have shared tools and collaboration across the organization. So the people who are out there finding new work and in the new business pipeline are collaborating in real time with the folks that are delivering the work and resourcing the projects. They have focused and very strong qualification frameworks. This one I feel like is extremely important. Sales qualification is one of the last things that I think an effective sales operation learns, but it is probably one of the most important. And I have a bunch of material that I can share with anyone who's interested on how to build a sales qualification framework. But essentially, the short version of it is you got to identify which customers are good for you, which projects are good for you. You got to put a lot of effort into making that something that you hold yourselves accountable to. And that makes the sales process much more consistent, and it makes it easier to collaborate across silos. Is there a question there?
People are interested in getting that from you.
Cool. I'll package that up and send it through Carl.
You can put it on the Slack channel too.
Yeah, I put it on the Slack channel. That's great. And then the same benchmark says that people with clearly defined solution sets, i.e. these solution-based services, these productized services, if you will, that makes for a much more effective sales process. And then also reusable assets and cases. So for each kind of customer, for each type of business that we're selling, we should have reusable assets in the form of proposals and white papers and in case studies that match those types of projects. And finally, the next part of operations that I think that people should focus on improving is proactive planning. And so I alluded to this a bit earlier. As you're completing projects on time, it's not just good for customer service, but it's also good for being able to plan what the next project is. And proactive planning is something that should be annualized. And so if your organization is going to consistently deliver, and you're going to be selective about the kind of work that you do and who you do the work for, if you're going to be proactive about who you're hiring and when you're hiring, if you're going to be proactive and maybe strategic about how you shape the services that you're offering, it starts with setting annual targets for the business. And so you should have revenue targets that are relative to your costs. So this one's pretty simple, and I think most of you are probably doing this, but if we've got a number of people that we are employing now and that we plan to employ throughout the year, in addition to the other expenses it takes to operate our business, that should be kind of the starting point for our revenue targets. And so, what is the cost? What is the net income or the EBITDA we want to achieve at the end of the year? And so that what are our, quarterly revenue targets based on when those costs come in? Starting your annual plan there And then and taking those revenue targets and translating them into sales targets is like the most important first step. And so if we need to hit a certain number of revenue per quarter, per month, what are the sales targets that we should have relative to that revenue per quarter to month? I've always considered sales and revenue two different things. Sales are bookings and revenues are earned when you execute the work. So I wouldn't count sales as revenue until you can do an invoice. And then if relative to those sales targets, to those revenue targets, what are the utilization targets relative to your capacity? So we've started with that cost and team. We've backed into a revenue number. We've backed into a sales number. What do we expect for utilization annually? We got another question there.
Keep going.
And then, those sales targets, they should be based on not just, arbitrary number, but how we think we're going to execute that work. So that should lead to what our capability targets are for the year. And then again, having those clearly defined solution sets, having those reusable assets such as project plans and use cases that we've used of projects where we've done this before, makes it a heck of a lot easier to start to forecast some of those things. And if we can be really good about proactive planning, ultimately we should find that we have a percentage of our quarterly revenue target in our backlog at any given time. This is kind of the key metric to knowing whether or not you really are good at proactive planning. First of all, you need to know what that quarterly revenue target is. And then secondly, you have to understand that based on actual project plans that are sold actionable work, where are we in that work in our quarterly backlog? When will that work be executed, of what capability, and how does that compare to our team's capacity for each of those capabilities? And the companies that can have over 70% of their quarterly revenue target in their backlog are crushing it on all kinds of different metrics, including things like the bid to win ratio, on their deal pipeline. And ultimately, these metrics are going to be what leads to higher utilization at the end of the year or growth. So I kind of like puked a bunch of stuff out at you guys about where I think that there's these best practices that you should start to adopt. But, of all the things that you got to be working on this quarter or this year, where can we get started? What are the low-hanging fruit things that I think that you should start with? First of all, I think that you should map your method. Again, it doesn't need to be this lean design thinking agile thing, but for each of your core services, what is the process from your customer's perspective? How do they feel going through that process? What are the key deliverables in that process? What are the key interaction points? And how do those create differentiating value for your business? And so, when they created this design thinking, lean startup, agile method, they did it because there's a bunch of pain points that people involved in software engineering, software development, product development have experienced over time without these methods, right? And so what have you developed in your processes for delivery that help your customers avoid the common pains of custom software development or whichever component of digital agency that you deliver, right? What are common pains that your customers have experienced from you in the past or from other organizations like yours, and what processes and artifacts of your process, interaction points have you developed in order to avoid those pains? And similarly, what are the common aspirations of your customers, and what are the goals that they have in common? And again, what are the processes, the deliverables, the interaction points that are going to ensure that their visions are met, that their aspirations are met, and they've developed those outcomes on a regular basis? If you can identify those things, the pains and the aspirations, and line up key points in your process that ensure that those things happen, that's where you find your differentiating value. I think that there's going to be a lot of agencies or shops or consultancies, whatever you call yourself, that are marketing speeds and feeds. They're marketing how fast they are, how consistent they are, how good they are, how cheap they are, whatever. They're talking about, how their culture is better and how, it's all because, we're special, they want to know what makes you special and why they care. And that's that differentiating value that you have. It's true, you might have a culture, you might have people that are unique and make you better than the next organization. But what specific pain or aspiration do those people cover off on that their competitors aren't? And what is the repeatable method, deliverable interaction point that you've developed that's going to make sure that they can consistently, avoid that pain or meet that aspiration?
Yeah, I just to chime in. I think some of those pains could be, how do we help this person solve a problem within their organization? How do we help them communicate what we're trying to, solve and actually help that individual? So it goes beyond just like, what's the method for delivery, but it's also what's the method of a relationship that ultimately is going to, again, either meet an aspiration or remove a pain point. Just like writing personas and stuff, and when you're doing Agile or whatever, knowing that persona, understanding their pain and aspirations is critical to understanding how your mapped method is valuable to them. It's not just about, well, our method is efficient.
Yep.
Why does efficiency matter to me? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Things like that.
So a quick story here. So for an example, we were pitching to United Health Group. We were building a mobile app, a user experience for the consumer. And as part of our pitch, we incorporated a key method that we use for big corporate organizations like that. During our design process, we talked about how this part of the process that we designed specifically for large organizations, where we interact with their brand folks, and that we incorporate their brand guidelines into our product development process, right? And so this might not be as important to some other organizations, but during our pitch, during our proposal, we specifically pointed that one out. And so we started by saying, hey, you might have worked with other shops before where they put this beautiful design together for your mobile app, but when it comes to review with the key stakeholders, the marketing team and the folks in the new business side of the house say that we can't go live with that thing because it doesn't meet the brand standards or whatever. And so because we've seen that before, we've developed this process and this part in here, and where we go and meet with those folks and get the design approval before blah, blah, blah. And then we show artifacts from that process with another company that's relevant to them. So in this case, we talked about Medtronic, a local company that makes medical products, and said, similarly, this is the same thing we did for them, and here's some artifacts, that process, here's how it worked, right? So we were able to communicate some empathy of some common pains that they had. We showed how our process covered off on those pains, and we gave them examples of our work. And so, for every proposal that we put together, every pitch that we did, we always tried to communicate, like, here are some pains that we know that you have, here are some aspirations that that you have, here's how our method maps to those pains and aspirations, and here's some examples or artifacts of that in the past.
We got about 5 minutes.
And I'm way over. Sorry, Carl. Similarly, you got to operationalize the sales process just like you do your delivery process. You don't have to overthink it, but you have to do at least these 4 bullets. Who are the customers and markets that you're going to focus on? When you've identified those, it's pretty easy to say, how do we qualify what a good customer, what a good project is? Again, I can share some stuff that I have here for that. And then make a sales funnel with stages that's simple. Don't overdo it. Don't have 10 stages. Do stages that you're going to be able to groom and consistently deliver on. You might have 3 stages. It might be, lead, proposal out, and, contracting, for example. You got to make sure that you treat those stages with some respect. That's part of sales qualification. If it's not actually in contract out, if they've said, no thanks, or if they said maybe later, take it out of that stage, right? If it's not in, you get it, right? You got to groom those stages, take them seriously. and have a documented process and roles and responsibilities. You need to create collaboration between the silos, the people out getting the new work and the people delivering. If you can have a process that's consistently delivered there, it's easier for them to take it seriously and collaborate. And again, I'm happy to share more details about this, but this sales process should be as operationalized as your project management process. And I promise you'll be happy that it is. And then similarly, you've got to align your organization and share on your differentiating values with the same systematic approach. If we can identify what those customers' needs, pains, and aspirations are, and if we can figure out which of our components of our process create differentiating value and could be mapped to those needs and pains, we can start to talk about that in thought leadership, in blogs, and videos and whatever, telling the story about how we've covered off on those pains or helped achieve those aspirations. Marketing our method, I think, is extremely important, and automating that, telling those stories of how we've done it for someone like them before, creating that, illustrating our empathy for them, but also showing that we've got experience solving their problems. It should be more about the method, less about like the specific piece of functionality we built, less like, here's this beautiful app, more about like, here's how we took this concept and made a business outcome for our customer. And I kind of had to speed through that last stuff. So
yeah, just to put a point on it too, on that last point, to reiterate, I think that sometimes people hear things like standardized product services as like, oh, we're going to make everything exactly the same and it's going to be a boring, repeatable job. And that's not the way to think about it. I mean, the way I think about it is, because we see a lot of agencies or people say, well, everything's custom. You're, brand new. We're going to do everything uniquely for you. I think it's unfair to make everybody pay for your discovery on sort of figuring out how to do the work, and they should be paying for the outcomes of the work, not the, you know what I mean? So that's just it doesn't mean that every project is going to be cookie cutter the same at all.
Right.
Because you need to say that, I think, make that point, especially when it comes to recruiting, because people want to be thinking about, being challenged with new problems and new things every day. So, sorry. But what?
How do you avoid overcomplicating the architecture of these structures?
There you go.
Are you saying the structure of the process or the structure of the team? Process. Yeah. So the way that I've done it, that I think is pretty simple, is we start by doing like a process map on a whiteboard with Post-it notes. And so the first step is, before you try, you just map what you're currently doing, right? And you get the team in a room, you get the delivery person and the salesperson in a room, and you say, all right, the start of our process is when we get a new lead, and the end of our process is when we send an invoice for finished work. Those are two artifacts of our process, right? A lead and a finished work invoice, right? And then the first thing that we do is take Post-it notes, and red ones, let's say, and we put red Post-it notes for every point in between the start and end of that process for other artifacts. So other things that we deliver, like scopes of work, status updates, all the things that you need that are artifacts of your process that that are quantifiable, right? Put those Post-its on a board. And then you take a yellow Post-it note, and then around those red Post-it notes, put the people processes, the activities, like the human behaviors that are required in order to create those deliverables, those artifacts, right? And as you start to see that come together, you realize that that's your repeatable process. Your team is putting those Post-it notes, and you're doing that affinity mapping thing that you do in design thinking, and you'll start to see that, oh yeah, we always do that same thing, right? We always do that thing before we send out that status report, or that thing before we write a scope of work, or that thing before we, point out the sprint or whatever. Like finding those different like human things, right? And then from there you can say, all right, why did the third Post-it note is the orange one, and it's the why. Why did we start to do those human things? why did behaviors, those processes, whatever, why did we start to deliver those artifacts? And when you put those why Post-it notes up there with the same affinity mapping thing, that's when you're really going to start to see those differentiating values, because what's going to come out from that is like, oh, we're doing that because that one time, right? That one time when we did that other project for those other guys and we got in trouble for the branding thing, that one time when we got blah, 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 and they thought that we, they thought we promised X and really we were talking about Y. Like you're going to find the Ys in those third sets of Post-it notes. And those should be synthesized into the leading part of your differentiating value, those pains, those aspirations, and then you can easily map the method to those whys, right?
And I think another product of that exercise is good is it allows you to sort of optimize the process too. You identify where are the things that actually provide value versus
Correct.
are just going through the motions or removing value, and get rid of those things.
So yeah, I'd say don't try to do a new process. Map what you're currently doing, because you guys wouldn't be on this call, you wouldn't be in business if your current method wasn't working. Any other questions in the next negative 1 minute?
How dare you provide extra value, sir? How dare you?
I think in hindsight, I think I might have put too much content in this.
Well, almost everybody hung out, man. So that's a sign that the content is valuable. So I truly appreciate it, Tom and David. Thank you so much for being here. Everybody who tuned in, thank you. We're going to get materials over to you. We'll get this video figured out and over. And before we let you go, I did want to announce real quick, we do have a new event next April, and it's Growth Camp. So many people are asking about growth. So many people are trying to figure it out. And we're happy to say that Tom's going to join us there. It'll be April 19th through 22nd in Asheville, North Carolina at the Biltmore, because the Biltmore is kind of like a success of growth. So, I'm not saying you're going to get to live there, but you'll at least get to visit for a little while. And this will actually be announced next week, so if you can keep it under wraps until then. But thanks, Tom and David, so much, and thanks, everybody, for joining us. This was a great session.